Welcome back to Up in the Blue Seats, your favorite Rangers podcast from the New York Post. As always, I'm Mollie Walker, your host, Rangers beat writer as well. And I'm joined by just Larry Brooks today, but the great Hall of Famer, Larry Brooks. Brian Boyle is unable to be here today. He had to take care of his children, as someone does when they are a parent. So sorry about that, but we'll have him back on next week for sure. Pretty solid week for the Rangers. JT Miller is a Ranger once again. Jonathan Quick, the first American goalie to 400 wins in NHL history. Lots of stuff to get into today, but first things first, obviously, the news is JT Miller. Larry, how did you evaluate the package that the Rangers sent to Vancouver in exchange for JT Miller?
Listen, the Rangers acquired a player who maybe is their best player on the team. JT Miller is maybe the best player on the Rangers. So I understand the angst of trading younger guys for a player who's going to be 32 in a couple of weeks, but this was one that you couldn't pass up. Look, we all admire Filip, understand his talent, understand that he has a ceiling, but you never know. As we've talked about this for years, and I've written about this for years, you never know when his next shift is going to be his last shift. It's just impossible to rely on Filip because he's health-wise, he's unreliable. As a player, he's as reliable as they come. He's going to bring a lot to Vancouver. He's big, has speed, transports the puck through the neutral zone, and there were stretches in which Filip was the Rangers' best player in games. But again, there's too much risk involved going forward with Filip, and I always felt that if Chris Drury had the opportunity to move Chytil for value, then it would be a greater risk not to do it than to do it. Victor Mancini is a young, unproven player. I think he profiles very well. Right-hand shot, big physicality, moves the puck up the ice, skates, and of course they've given in a first rounder, a protected first rounder. But again, I don't think this is this isn't a Rangers team that is building for 5 years from now. I see them as having their best chance with this kind of iteration that will change over the next 2 or 3 years. And so when you have a chance to get an elite player like JT Miller, who not only has the on-ice talent that they need, but has the off-ice personality that they require. I mean, they become a very vanilla team, and he's not a vanilla guy. He's intense. He plays with tenacity. He plays with emotion. And I think that's those are assets that the Rangers have been lacking, not only this year, but for the last couple of years. I really believe, and I understand the Rangers couldn't have made the deal 2 years ago. But I believe that the Rangers would have beaten Tampa if JT Miller had been in the lineup. I believe that the Rangers would have beaten Florida if JT Miller had been in their lineup last year. So I think he is he's an elite player. He's a great passer, one of the great passers I've ever covered. Plays every shift like the cup is on the line. Mollie, you wrote about this after the Sunday night game against Vegas, how infectious he is when he plays with that tenacity, when he brings the urgency, and he brings urgency onto the ice every shift. I think it's a winner for the Rangers.
I feel like he embodies everything that we've been banging the drums about all season long of their biggest attribute that was missing. I feel like all of it is jam-packed into number 8. Like at least what I've seen in the first 2 games. How do you evaluate the first 2? Obviously, the loss in Boston and then a win over the Golden Knights Sunday night.
Well, the game in Boston was very disappointing.
Yeah.
Their performance was it looked, it wasn't quite as bad, but it looked like a lot like December.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't defend. They didn't necessarily compete. They lost essentially every one-on-one, and it was troubling because they were coming off a game against Carolina that was deficient in all those areas too.
Right.
So Saturday afternoon against a Bruins team that had been hammered 7-2 and 6-2 in their previous 2 games, and a team that the Rangers are chasing for a wild card spot, they just came up small. They just did. I didn't particularly like Igor Shesterkin's game on Saturday. I understand that. I understand the quality of shots that he faces at times, but he's supposed to be the best goalie in the world. And when or one of the top 3 goalies in the world, and when you have one of the top 3 goalies in the world, he's supposed to make some of those saves. So I thought Saturday was disappointing, and again because they had fallen down. They had gone 3 straight now, with 3 straight without a point, and they're in an 8 or 9 team mix where even if 4 of the teams lose, well, 1 or 2 might get a point from a loser's point, but the other 4 might win. And so, they have to leapfrog a half dozen teams in order to make the playoffs. So they cannot afford to go 3 games without getting a point. But their response against Vegas was very encouraging, and it was on the first shift, right? That JT Miller lit up Brett Howden. And it took a couple of periods. The Rangers were down 2-1, but they were playing well. And then the third was one of their best periods of the year, and it was necessary. There is no way you can go 4 straight without getting a point. I think they're in a much better spot as a team than they were in December, but the games are dwindling down. They cannot have lost weeks. They cannot have lost weekends. And so I thought their third period last night was urgent from the entire 20 minutes. They got a very good performance from Jonathan Quick. I thought Mika Zibanejad was more engaged than he had been in a while, and he was physical. His play, keeping the puck in on the power play goal was impressive, and then he went to the net to bang in the rebound, right? So it was a really good third period, and they need to build off that. They need to build off the emotion. I mean, I think JT brings a lot of emotion in the room, on the ice. They need to build off it. Wednesday night, the Bruins are back here at the Garden. It's a game they need to win. Friday night against Pittsburgh at the Garden, it's a game they need to win. Saturday night against Columbus, a big game. 3 games remaining until 4 Nations. So Sunday was as encouraging as Saturday was discouraging.
Which I feel like there's been a lot of that this season, but you're 100% right. It's been that way for a bit now. Every game is a big game. Every game feels like must win at this point, especially when you're on the outside looking in on the playoff picture. But let's zero in on a couple of other things I wanted to about Sunday in particular. The third period, you got Matt Rempe drawing a penalty to the power play. You got Chris Kreider drawing a penalty for the power play. They're capitalizing on those opportunities. It was finding ways to win. And
Will Cooley.
Oh, the hit.
Oh.
Absolutely lit him up.
Oh, Alex Pietrangelo. Honestly, this is one of the more impressive open ice hits I can recall. And, there was no there was nothing borderline about it. It
Nope.
was legal. He
He
took it,
lined
I
them
mean,
up.
honestly, and I think that Will is going to be one of the players who benefits greatly from being around JT. Because I think there's a lot of I don't think that Will necessarily has the passing skills that JT has, but there's a lot of Cooley in JT, or JT in Cooley, and I think it's going to be just a great experience for Will Cooley to share a locker room and to share a uniform with JT Miller.
Of all the positives, though, I feel like Mika Zibanejad's performance Sunday night was far and away one of the most encouraging for a multitude of reasons. Yeah. And I wrote about this in my column because you and I had gone back and forth when we saw that Mika was playing on the wing, which was a bit of a surprise, I think, for a lot of people on the outside looking in. You see they get JT Miller, and you immediately think, okay, Trocheck, Miller, Zibanejad. Sure. 1, 2, 3. It makes them a deeper team. It makes them a longer team. And then he's playing on the wing Saturday in Boston. Wasn't really sold on it, obviously, after the game in Boston, but obviously that was just because it was a disappointing game all around. But if you do look at the numbers, it wasn't too bad for that line in particular.
No, they were good.
But yeah, the eye test for Sunday, I mean, Mika, it was one of his best games of the season, I thought, just in terms of an engagement standpoint, an energy standpoint. And I wrote in my column, I mean, Miller is such a energetic force that what better player to plug him up to right now than Mika Zibanejad? Because right. I feel like, as we've seen this entire season from head coach Peter Laviolette, whether you want to agree with it or not, because there's arguments to be made for both sides, I think, he's been trying to get him going desperately, I think. And I think that this is one of those moves that is also about getting Mika Zibanejad going. So how do you see that whole situation with Mika on the wing?
Well, I also thought that Mika's post-game comments after Vegas were instructive, because he talked about how comfortable he is playing with another center.
Yes.
That, he had referenced that when he was in the middle, he'd, played at times with centers who were then on his wing, and, they understood each other's responsibilities. And so I understand that Mika, like, this might be a great fit for Mika. I'm not, and it could be a dominant line. It could be. And so, that's something that is important for a team that really hasn't had a dominant line all year. Been up and down. The Trocheck line has been up and down. Zibanejad's line has, really not made much of an impact wherever he's been. And after the start of the season, the most impactful line, Cooley, Chytil, and Kakko, were broken up, and two-thirds of them were
not an option any longer.
Like 2,500 miles away. So how about last night, though? All three guys, all three of the guys on the kid line scored. Frenier, Kakko,
just for different teams this time.
And Bill. But the issue I have with it is that look, I love Johnny Brodzinski. I admire Johnny Brodzinski. But I don't think he really belongs as a third line center. Last year, if you recall, after Chytil went down in the 10th game of the season, they tried Bonino at center. They moved Barclay Goodrow up to third line, but they settled on Brodzinski. And what was their biggest need going to the trade deadline? Getting a third line center, right? Alex Wennberg. Yes. So I think now they're going to be looking for a third line center.
I was going to say, that was my follow-up.
I don't want to, I don't want any way to come down on Johnny Brodzinski. I mean, here's a guy who you have to admire. He has just worked and worked and worked. He's one of the best 750 players in the world, but I don't think their third line, can thrive with Brodzinski in the middle. So that's the trade-off, right? They lose a little bit of depth, but maybe Carrick gets a little bit more time. Maybe the fourth line gets a little bit more time to even up. But I don't want the third line to get less time, because I don't want Cooley to get less time.
Right.
So there's mixing and matching to be done by Laviolette. If moving Mika to right wing with Miller and Panarin gets the best out of Mika, then that's an important plus for the Rangers going forward. They need him. We've talked about this all year. They need
Yeah.
the Zibanejad that they've had the last 7 years. They also need to get Kreider going, and I thought he was more physical last night. I thought he was much more involved last night. But if they can, if they are, I think they're now going to be looking for a third line center, and there are probably some available. But again, what's the cost? Like last year, they were driving for the President's. They knew they were in the playoffs, and this was an issue they need to fix for the playoffs. You don't want to. I don't think they're going to want to do very many rental deals in order to try and get into 8th place. So but there's a lot. It's still March 7th is still a little over a month away. There's games before Four Nations. There are handful of games after Four Nations before the deadline. So that remains to be seen. But again, if this brings out the best in Mika, it's great.
Yeah, I think, and I do feel like whether it's to Laviolette's detriment, the fact that he has been, he's sticking with Mika in the late game, big game situations. He's stuck with him on power play 1. And I do feel like a lot of it is because he feels like, everybody's calling for Mika to get scratched. Everybody's calling for Mika to sit down, which there is certainly an argument to be made that maybe that would be good for him. But I think just against in speculation that they probably don't see that as something that's going to bode well for Mika, that it might make things worse. Right. So that's why I feel like we've seen how Laviolette has managed Zibanejad in that way.
And when Laviolette actually talked about it on Saturday after the Bruins game, he was asked why, and he said that, well, if I go 1, 2, 3, and I'm paraphrasing, if I go 1, 2, 3 with Miller, Trocheck, Mika's not going to get enough ice time.
Exactly.
And it's important, Laviolette believes he's a key piece and needs to be on the ice.
And we all agree, and it's kind of like we all see that they're going to need him. They're going to need him. They need him to get going. And this, I find it very interesting because Mika has played wing in his NHL career, not since the first couple of seasons in Ottawa when he, right. You had given me such a great tidbit from my early story the other day that he was at the Garden April 5th, 2014, I think, and he scored playing on the wing. And this is 2.5 years before the Rangers acquired him. And yet Saturday in Boston was the first time that Mika has started on the wing as a Ranger. So I think that also puts it into perspective how dire the situation is, that it's come to this point where they're putting him at a position that he's never played for this organization in a starting point. We've talked, he has played on the wing in late game situations, in regular situations, just not starting. But you said this is the first time you've seen him take full shifts on the wing. But it's also interesting what they're doing is JT and Mika are switching too, which I can't imagine. I wonder if it's confusing, but Mika said that he has played. It's a position he's not. Well,
it was funny Saturday because JT, of course, has played a lot of wing.
Yeah.
And he was essentially a winger when he was here the first time. But it was funny on the first period Saturday in Boston. Like JT was playing all positions. He was, in the defensive zone, he was playing low. He was going out to the point. It took a little time for them to get it together, but it looked seamless Sunday night. It did. It looked like they had it, figured out. Listen, they're both very smart players. They've both been around for a long time. And so, they'll get that down. I didn't think it was an issue last night at all.
No.
But it was funny how scrambly it was, kind of when he was on at least in the first period in Boston. Of course, he was also operating on like 2 hours sleep. He scored twice. He was their best player on Saturday. So
4 points in his first 2 games. Yeah. And I think I saw a funny stat that he had ended his career on a 2-game point streak at his tenure in New York
He scored in his final game. He scored in his final game the day, against Detroit at the Garden the day before he was traded. Funny, the Rangers, of course, that was the 2018, deadline purge where, a few weeks after the letter, and they were moving guys out. But they were going to Vancouver for a Western Canadian trip on the trade deadline. Mm-hmm. And it was Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton. And he was on the flight to Vancouver. So and of course he was traded to Tampa. So he had to go back. But, it's just funny how things just tie in. He's on the flight to Vancouver where he becomes, after a year, after a while with Tampa, he becomes an elite NHL player, and now he's back. I covered him from his first training camp.
I was going to ask you, what do you remember about his first go around in New York? What sticks out?
Well, it was interesting. Well, listen, he was an adolescent. It took him a long time to become an adult. He has acknowledged that. There were as withering comments from a coach as I've ever heard about a player, and it was from Alain Vigneault. I mean, JT was up, he was down, he was up. There were issues with him, and at one point, I think Vigneault said, "I don't know if he's going to be a pro." Mm. And when they sent him down, and but he matured. He was very headstrong. I remember one year he was, still, maybe he was 21, 22. Guys then came to, New York and started skating like 3 or 4 weeks ahead of time. And he showed up one day ahead of training camp. And that turned off every veteran in the room. He's a different person. But I remember his confidence, his boundless confidence. I told this story the other day. His first game was in 2011. He was drafted in 2011, so he came to camp in 2011. They only had a few games that year in North America because they were going over to Europe to start the season, so their first exhibition game, and Tortorella was the coach. So their first exhibition game was in Albany against the Devils, and he played in it. And his first period was, so-so. He didn't get on very much. Second period was a little bit better. In the third period, he was playing on the line with Sean Avery, by the way. What a pair that would be.
Yeah, seriously.
But in the third period, he was outstanding. He was 18, playing against first exhibition game. And I talked to him after the game, and the locker room was, it's the locker room in Albany. The room was basically empty. So I walked over to him and said, what'd you think? He said, yeah, first period, I just didn't want to make any mistakes. Second period was a little bit better. He said, but the third was night and day. He said, you should see, you're going to see me the next game or whatever. It's going to be twice as good the next game. Yeah. So the next morning at training camp, he's skating with the C group. Didn't quite care for his confidence. He didn't play another game. He went back to the OHL. So he's always had a lot to it. Always. I enjoyed him. He had one of their best playoff games.
Mhm.
In fact, it was Game 6 in 2015 against Tampa when they were facing elimination. They were down 3-2 in the conference finals, and he was on a line with Nash and Derek Brassard. And so it was Brassard, Miller, and Nash, and he had 4 points. Nash had 4 points. I think Brass had 3 or 4. So it was really one of the best performances by a line in recent Rangers playoff history.
Yeah, now what is it? I think it's like a 4-game point streak now for him with the Rangers, except 2,000 plus games or days in between. And I mean, what number Ranger is this that has been here, left, come back? We got JT in that room. We got VC in that room.
Right.
Tyler Mott did it.
Yeah. No, it was funny. Like Kenny Albert Saturday in Boston was telling me the number of first round draft choice that it was a trivia quiz. He said there are 6 guys, and I got a couple of them I didn't remember. Ron Duguay came back as a first rounder. Lucien Deblois came back as a first rounder. Alex Kovalev came back as a first rounder. I didn't remember that Peter Ferraro actually came back for a game as a first rounder, and Jay Moore also came back as a first rounder. So he's part of an exclusive group there. Yeah.
We gotta love it. Well, it'll be exciting to see what JT Miller can do to help this Rangers team make their playoff push. The other news of the week, so to say, Jonathan Quick, 34 save performance against his former team, the Vegas Golden Knights, who he won his 3rd Stanley Cup with. I mean, I don't even know where to start. I more so want to say just what an honor it has been to watch Jonathan Quick do what he's done at the end of his career in a Rangers jersey, no less. And I think that it is so unbelievable how he has gone from perhaps one of the most hated athletes for Rangers fans, for New York fans, for denying them a Stanley Cup in 2014, and now he has stolen the hearts of not only his Rangers teammates, but Rangers fans, New Yorkers. It's been so unbelievable to see. I mean, even my own mom, who was with me when the Rangers lost in 2014, she's like, I can't believe how hard I root for Jonathan Quick. She's like, I never thought I would see the day. And I'm sure a lot of fans listening to this feel the same way. But what have you made just of this almost second act of his career, so to say, that he has had in New York?
Well, he is revered by his teammates. That's what strikes me. He is as respected by his teammates as any player I've ever been around. And I can tell you too that I'm somewhat involved in the youth hockey community in Connecticut. We all know that Scott plays for the Richfield Lions. So I'm go Lions.
Go Lions.
Go Lions. So tough weekend though for the Lions.
It's okay.
So I'm in and around the rinks, and as much as he is revered in the Rangers room, he is revered in the Connecticut youth hockey community. He is just a great goaltender. I don't want to say this because I don't really know him personally, but he's one of these athletes who fits into. He's a great player, but he's a better human. And he's just like, you don't hear, honestly. I mean, if everyone could grow up to be Jonathan Quick, what a great world we'd have. But his performance the last 2 years, it is a second act. There were a lot of questions about him when he came to New York.
So many.
His career. He was on the downside of his career. His numbers were ugly the last couple of years.
He had a horrible preseason.
Right, and he came in, and I think there were a lot of questions about, well, why did they sign him? What is it only because he's from Connecticut? they drafted Hugh Jessamine because he was a Rangers fan. Is this, are they signing him because
Rangers love Ranger fan kids,
but like he has been reborn as a goaltender. I don't know. I presume that Benoit Allaire has a lot to do with this. And, I don't want to slight, Jeff Malcolm, who is the goaltending coach now, but I think that Benny actually was the guy who said, yeah, we should sign him.
Yeah.
They all of their goaltending personnel decisions over the last, 20 years have gone through Benoit Allaire. So I said yes. And the way, the other thing about Quick, so he has been immense. He has been extremely valuable for them. Mm-hmm. But the other thing about him, about Quick, is he's so entertaining to watch. He plays so differently.
Seriously.
He's like this throwback guy.
It's the athleticism.
It's the athleticism. I mean, he's just so fun to watch. So honestly, it's been a great marriage, just mm-hmm. a great marriage. And as I'm very happy that I got to cover Jonathan Quick during his career. I like it.
Yeah, when I describe what I'm seeing from him, it's almost like a modernized version of his vintage self, almost, which is what I feel like you're speaking to with how Benoit Allaire has come in and perhaps tweaked some of his mechanics and tightened up some of his form things, but that vintage all over the crease kind of play that he brings is entertaining as all hell, and players around the league feel the same way. I think a quote that's been said to me several times is he makes the goalie position look fun, almost, which I think is what a high compliment coming from the players in front of you who are shooting as hard as they can at your face every night. So I found that to be, and you speak about the players revering him. I'm coming up with a feature tomorrow about this 400 win milestone and a peek behind the curtains at this career that he's had. It's the executives too. It's the people in the front office who and people behind the bench who have had a front row seat to see what he's become in the NHL and to be the best American goalie of all time. It's been a pleasure for those around him as well. And I think the other half to him that we here in New York, I think, have tried to really put on a platform is how much he's meant to the team camaraderie and fostering morale and the little things that he's done. I mean, he stood up, he made a speech in the playoffs. Trocheck said it was the kick in the ass that they needed before they went out. He takes in Matt Rempe. He is constantly, him and his wife, constantly team dinners, team parties. They're always the one that's planning these things. That stuff matters. That stuff goes such a long way in a locker room especially for the Rangers, when you've got young guys, you've got rookies now. But the way that the young guys have spoken about him so highly, he clearly makes such an effort to lend out a helping hand, to extend advice, extend his knowledge that he has. And I think it has had such a huge impact on the Rangers room, more than I think people understand. So, I mean, my understanding, I've heard that the Rangers and Jonathan Quick's camp have not started discussions for a possible extension for next season, but I imagine that that's on the table. And, I know that he's feeling good. And I don't think he has told anybody that what he wants to do for next season yet, but it looks like we could have another season of Jonathan Quick in New York. Do you think that would be a smart choice for the Rangers?
If Jonathan Quick is invested all in, then yeah. But I have no idea. If he wants to if he wants to move on. But if he's entirely invested, sure. It's interesting too that Quick the Rangers have had some great American goaltenders. I mean, Mike Richter,
Yeah.
John Van Beesbrook. So he kind of is following in a line, and if Quick wants to play, I think it's probably up to him. I think it's probably up to him.
Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see on that one. And that sounds like a good place for us to wrap up. So thanks so much for listening. As always, you can give us a thumbs up down below and let us know what you think about the JT Miller trade in the comments. And we'll talk to you again next week. Thanks.